Not here.
Oh, my goodness. You're welcome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nice.
Big Wednesday.
Yeah.
So I think now would be a
Thank you.
good time to ask if anybody has any happy days. Lydell.
I have two $90. On your table is a, little flyer for a fundraiser for the folks at Bobblehead George. For those of you who may or may not remember this information, you know that. They are holding a fundraiser at John Bryant's dinner. Interesting organization that is centered right here in York, and they go all over the country to historical sites and basically bring meals to watch and be entertained by and glean some information about some historical sites like Chapel and some others. So, on next Thursday night, you want to come out for a good meal? They actually, one of our vendors looking at it on a year ago.
I think, yeah, I think it was. Chris, can you do
Yeah, I'm just, I'll get back my, my winnings today for the, folks that helped out last week with the, pantry, Jim Norton and Tim Kohler. So just a thank you for everyone who helped out. It was, quick evening because everyone pitched in, so it was very nice, and it was good to see people walk away with food for the week and beyond.
Good deal. Thanks, Chris. Jim Norton, I'm gonna move around.
I have $5 for everybody that contributed the stuffing and the dessert mixes for the Thanksgiving thing. Number of people gave me cash, and that's turned into 135 boxes of stuffing and brownies in the back of my car. So thank you. And I'm going to need a bigger car, which I think would be a nice fundraiser.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, there you go.
My first $50, it's my annual, today's election day, get out there and vote, and please be kind. The political climate lately has been atrocious and awful. And the second $50, I'm very happy, after 20 years, my student loans for law school are paid.
$5 for our server, who does a phenomenal job. I finished, and I was talking to John, and my plate disappeared. And if that isn't bad enough, I was carrying a lot of stuff from that area over. She grabbed a coffee. She said, "I'll take your coffee. Where do you want to sit?" So these $5 are not going here. They're going to the server this morning.
Anyone else? Any other? Oh.
$5 because we had again our family visiting this weekend for a long weekend. But sometimes it's shocking what we learn because we never knew all the tricks that are out there today. And we just want to share this one because we're still trying to come to terms with it. It happens that people are putting $100 bills on the windscreens, under the windscreen wiper. And so whoever car gets into the car wants to take the $100 without driving off. And these $100 are laced with fentanyl. Ooh. And that's how they nowadays kidnap people. And, we were just, we said it can't be possible. And of course, our son being being a medical doctor, he said that it takes less than 2 minutes. When you touch it, when you have the right dosage, you just have it on your fingers, and they just wait in the wings and take you away. So we wanted to share that with all of you. Not $50, but be careful.
Where's that happening? Where?
In Virginia Beach.
Virginia area. Over here to Deb.
$50, one for each eye. Had cataracts removed, and I don't need glasses.
You know, I was gonna ask if your glasses got working, but I thought I better not. Give you a bad score. Jeff?
I have 10 happy dollars and thanks to Jim Knoll for inviting me to help serve at the soup kitchen last, I guess it was Wednesday morning, I believe, Tuesday morning, excuse me. And it was a very nice experience. Having said that, my job was to serve mac and cheese, and there was a little delay in getting the tray out. And what I noticed was that there were probably 3 or 4 ladies of the evening who came in there for lunch that day. And it just so happened when there was this delay, one of them propositioned me. It was the first time in my life I was ever propositioned serving mac and cheese, but the story gets worse because I went home and told my wife what happened, and she said, "Could you describe this person to me?" And I said, "Well, very tall, probably about 6'3" or 6'4" taller than I am," and described the person's body. My wife said, "You dumbass, it was probably a transgender male."
Hey, didn't I always say you should go in there and try to serve lunch? It's a great experience, isn't it? Anyone else, any other happy dollars? Very good. Does anybody have, oh, hold on.
Well, in one sense, these are not happy dollars. My 103-year-old mother-in-law died last Monday. We've been praying for that, and so has she. A couple of weeks ago, she said to me, "Can't you just give me a shot and end this?" She was under hospice care. She died Monday, and the funeral will be Saturday. So I was absent the last couple of weeks, and that's why.
That's awesome.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? No. And I can't think of any either.
The Rotary Foundation dinner is on Saturday.
Rotary Foundation dinner, thank you, Elizabeth.
In Gettysburg College, at Gettysburg, Hotel.
How many, do we have anybody that's signed up and registered? Elizabeth is, I'm not sure, is Chris Pollock planning to go?
I have no idea.
Okay, I think there is like maybe one last chance if you would like to go to the Rotary Foundation dinner. That is this Saturday, at Gettysburg College.
Hotel.
Gettysburg Hotel, thank you. But there's not a lot of time to register. I think you have like minimal, that window is really closed in, but thank you for bringing that up. Any other announcements? If not, I'm going to turn things over to Andy Ryan, who's going to introduce our speaker for this one. Sorry.
It's my pleasure. Good morning, everybody. Happy to introduce today's speaker, Sam Dorn. She's a senior grant consultant with over 20 years of experience. She's been instrumental in providing grant writing assistance to various public safety and nonprofit agencies throughout the United States to enable them to obtain alternative funding, as well as provide instruction on statistical compilation, analysis, and program development. Sam Dorn has been a reviewer for several federal agencies and instructs grant writing workshops. She was recently added to the board of York County History Center, and she's one of the founders of Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of African American cemeteries in York County, Pennsylvania. She honors the memory of those interred in their folds through historic research, documentation, education, preservation, restoration, and community engagement. She's an active member and participant in the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds Network, the Black Cemetery Network. She consults with the National Cemetery Administration to promote the care of African American veterans in private cemeteries. And she's an active contributor to the Veterans Legacy Program, highlighting the untold accomplishments of many veterans. She's also a celebrity. Her work has recently been featured on the PBS station WITF, CBS Sunday Morning with Martha Teichner, USA Today, a novel by Neil King Jr., former Wall Street Journal writer, and in a CNN article by Elliot McLaughlin. Please help me welcome Sam Dorn, today's guest. Oh, she's also a fellow football enthusiast and she roots for the San Francisco 49ers, who are recently going to get their star running back back. Is that what you're disappointed for?
No. The disappointment is because I've spoken at a few Rotary clubs and they sing. I got up early this morning to be here and there's still singing going on. What are
And
you
knock
doing?
yourself out.
Anybody want to volunteer? I think I just heard that you used to.
Give used to.
Sam, sir, would you like to lead us in song this morning? I think, you know, just some levity for what's going on in the world today.
My country is a sweet land of liberty, of the I Crime with my father's time, land of the crime from every house, it's time, and freedom reign.
You now know who my favorite is. Okay, let's see if this is gonna work. Are you all able to hear me okay? All right, and if it doesn't, I'll just say next slide. So I had the pleasure of speaking with this group a few years ago, of course, in the midst of COVID, so we were via Zoom. I know we have probably 1 or 2 people on Zoom this morning. So also, if you have any questions and type those in, I'm sure those questions will come through as well. I'm pretty flexible when I do presentations because I want it to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So please do feel free to interrupt, to ask questions along the way. So with this program, I call this the page over prominence, and I'll explain here where that is coming from. But the first question I have for the group, let's see how we do. Do I need to be showing this a different place? It helps to turn it on.
It should be working.
There we go. So when I first started with this presentation and having that term paved over prominence, I had some folks say to me, well, Sam, some of the folks that you're talking about in your presentation, they were poor. How can they be prominent? And so my question to the group, this word, this term, what does prominence mean to you when you think of that word? Anybody?
Noticeable.
Noticeable? And we have a prominent Rotarian this morning, who's, I believe, one of your original folks. Anybody else prominent?
Outstanding.
Say that again?
Outstanding.
Outstanding. So I had to come back and say, I use the word prominence because these were individuals who were prominent in the Black community. They were the leaders of our churches. They were our educators. They were the heads of their families. Again, prominent in the Black community. And so I never thought, in full confession, this individual was a white male. And he's telling me what should be prominent or have importance to me in my family history. I didn't understand that. But we had a conversation because we are actually good friends and we could walk through, but that reminded me that not everybody understands why or what's going on in my head and why I chose that title. I am a pacer, so I am going to put this on and walk. And then if there's any problems with hearing me, just let me know. Everybody should have received one of the brochures with these come from the rack card. I have to point out, we do have 2 folks here, at least 2 from Explore York. And we have a wonderful partnership with Explore York, and they were able to help us to do a professional brochure that we have for our tour. So this is part of a walking tour in the city of York.
I volunteer at Lebanon Cemetery. Maybe. Want to go to the next slide? I volunteer at Lebanon Cemetery, which is located in North York. So it's 1412 North George Street, just where in the area between 10th and 11th, right before you get to Route 30. Lebanon Cemetery is a historic Black cemetery. Full confession, I'm born 1970. I had no idea that cemeteries were segregated. This was just the place where my family was buried. I didn't know it was a Black cemetery until about 5 years ago. And yes, I am a proud AARP card carrying individual. So, you know, again, it was just a place where my family was buried. And I had two family members that passed away in 2019. I work on grants for a living, started working on grants, trial by fire, working in the DA's office, was not hired to work on grants, but had to learn quickly. And I now consult with departments all across the country, primarily public safety. And I actually specialize with tactical teams. So I'm the person out there getting the armored vehicles and mobile command centers, things on that line. So this was kind of like a way to separate myself from some of those things we talk about as far as the history. Going to the next slide here. I was never into history. I am a numbers person. I'm math science. And the passion that comes from the work being done at the cemeteries, because believe it or not, history is different. One, when the people look like you, but also when they're related to you. How many of you actually know what your grandparents did for a living? Do you know, keep your hands up if you know the maiden name of your grandmothers. Keep your hands up if you know the maiden name of your great grandmothers. See how few people it drops off? I didn't know. So this has been an opportunity to kind of learn who I am, but also learning more about our family and our contributions. So being a numbers person, what we do at the cemetery as we were documenting the headstones, the monuments, any of the stones, numbers kept repeating. In this case, we're talking about addresses. So whether it was looking at a death certificate, reading an obituary, these addresses kept repeating. Anybody heard of redlining?
Mhm.
Well, I can prove redlining. Redlining really and truly did happen where you have a concentration of African Americans in certain neighborhoods because that's the only place where they were restricted to live. But we can prove that through the obituaries, through the death certificates, because people were concentrated in the same neighborhood. So I didn't know why. Kyle, don't laugh at me, but I started an Excel spreadsheet and I started listing the date, but also the address and a comment as to what that particular reference point was for. And as it grew, I started listing them. This one was North Duke Street, Cleveland Avenue, East King Street. So I started grouping the streets together. I always tell people my brain works in cohorts, that I have to have a way to be able to pull that data together. So what we find here, this is North Duke Street, specifically the first through 100 blocks of North Duke Street. Okay, so that's going to take you from Market down to, what's the name of the street right before the stadium where the Explore York is on? North Street, East North Street. So names that we start seeing in that area. Mary A.C. Smallwood Gray. She's the sister of James Smallwood, the Smallwood School. And we never talk about her, but she was a physician. We talk about her brother, who was an educator, but she was a physician. She lived in that block, as well as her brother, James Smallwood, their mother, Lydia Smallwood. We also see, of course, the name Gray. So if you are familiar with the Goodrich family, Glenn Alvin Goodrich married Rhoda Gray Goodrich. So the Gray family was also very much involved with the Underground Railroad. Okay, so again, we start putting these names, but then I also see this name Victor Carey. So there was an instance where we see Victor Carey, but then later I see Victor Carey's name on Cleveland Avenue. My brain's going, okay, were they family? Were they like, what led these folks to be in other places? Did they go to church together? What's happening here? Another part of doing this type of work, when you're talking about trying to research Black families, you're going to hear me say Negro, you're going to hear me say colored, Black, African American. Generally, it depends on the time frame that we're talking about, the time period. It's interesting now that so many people want to change the terminology and make it politically correct of saying African American. I can tell you, if you're trying to research somebody back in the 1800s, 1900s, even up through the 1960s, if your search term is African American, you're not getting a hit. You have to know, understand the terminology. And not just for a time period, you'll notice there's a date. Part of the reason for the date is because we found that addresses change in York County around 1903. As they were putting in more structures, there was a address change. So I'm thinking people moved, like why did they just move 3 doors down? But it was the same house, change of address. So you also have to have the time period. Again, you can do this. The reason we have to kind of go this route when you're talking about what happens with Black history is because oftentimes for people that look like me, your name was not mentioned. The newspaper articles, the clippings are going to say something like Negro boy 17, blah, blah, blah. Colored female 22, blah, blah, blah. There's no name. But if you can have that article or reference point associated with an address, now using the address, we can search for even to the point of having a name. Doing crime analysis work and intel, yeah, that's what led to this. I actually have been working with some detectives, believe it or not, in New Jersey, Patterson, New Jersey, to teach them how to do this. Because they couldn't figure out what's trying to solve some of their crimes, why certain people were in certain places. And I'm like, because their grandmothers were sisters, name change. Did I mention that? So going to the next slide, what happens here as we're coming through with these trends? As I was able to put the numbers together, I found that overwhelmingly, the places where our prominent Black families live, work, and worship are parking lots in the city of York. Paved over prominence. So the 100 block of North Duke Street, that is where the Seatown parking lot is. You'll see that on the next slide, but just to give you an idea, what you have here was a part of a map from 1850, and right under the letter W, it says that there is a church there. That's the first AME church in York, which is now Small Memorial AME in the 400 block of South Queen Street. But it originated in the 100 block of North Duke Street. But also at that site, directly across from Explore York offices, there was a cemetery there. We have no documentation that the bodies were ever moved. So most likely the wife of Mr. Goodrich and at least 2 of his children and other Black families are under the parking lot, next slide, at Seatown. Now, I am not proposing, this is the Duke Street side. I'm not proposing that we go and we dig up, the parking lot or do anything like that. But is it possible that maybe we could have some type of historical marker at this location to identify the importance of what was here? So if anyone knows John Kleindenz from, he was with C.S. Davidson, I was able to find a little newspaper clipping that had the coordinates from when the adjacent property to the church was being sold. We had all the coordinates from a little article from the 1800s. And so when I sent that to John, he ran down, that's his tape measure there, in the rain, and he mapped out where the structures for the church and the cemetery would have been. And I'm now working with some folks in York that we're going to see about, possibly, I don't know how they do it, but they said it almost looks like a shadow or a ghost print to put into the cemetery to identify that foundation of the church. Questions? Next slide, please. So that's just one area, Cleveland Avenue, the Reeves family, so Helen Reeves Thaxton, who, excuse me, is known for starting early childhood education at Crispus Attucks. She lived in that block, but she never had children of her own. Their home was never listed in the Green Book, and yet there are all these articles showing individuals who stayed there through the years. That included Mr. Ray Crenshaw, who later went on to be with City Council. When Mr. Crenshaw first came to York and then was taking classes at York College, he stayed with Miss Helen Reeves Thaxton. Her father, John Reeves, he sold oyster sandwiches, when you could actually eat the oysters out of the Susquehanna. But through his proceeds, he was able to purchase a home for each of his children. Now, I love my siblings. I don't necessarily think that I would want all of our houses to be side by side, but he purchased several homes over in this Cleveland Avenue and Boundary Avenue area. And in addition to that, you'll start seeing those names. I mentioned Victor Carey, who was over on North Duke Street. Well, he married Jane Reeves Carey. Their children went to York Catholic. Their daughter is the first Black salutatorian for York Catholic. I think she graduated around 1936. Okay, but it makes sense because she was raised in by her aunt, who was supporting education. Now, the interesting thing for me, a lot of the names that we see them later as playground directors on Moravian Playground, which is going to come up soon. One of the other, I was just looking with the names here, Etha and Clara Coles. We'll see them on King Street. Miss Etha, when their father, it was actually their adopted father, Reverend Coles, when he passed away, they went to live with the Reeves family. So we see them then now on Cleveland Avenue. Miss Etha is credited with being the first Black female in York County to work in a factory. It was a sewing factory. This is the part that I don't get. The woman that she was working for, who was white, got sick. So she sent Etha in her place. But they loved her work productivity so much that they kept her on. So there's these articles. She's the first Black female to work in a factory. This was around like 1905. And that's all we knew about her until we started doing this work at the cemetery, because people get married and their name changes. So then later we see her as Etha Coles Armstrong, who led the Phyllis Wheatley Club, which was part of the Negro subcommittee of the women's suffrage movement. She was fighting for the right to vote. Just yesterday, I posted on my Facebook, anything I do that's related to history is posted as public. So one of the other individuals who was part of that Phyllis Wheatley Club, in 1922, at the age of 106, she was able to register to vote in York County for the first time. She had been enslaved in Prince George's County and talked about the brutality that she and her family had witnessed. And so she was so proud to be able to vote. And so I had to put up there, I don't care who you vote for, but our ancestors fought for this, go vote. Next slide, please. I mentioned Miss Helen Reeves Thaxton. Her father was John C. Reeves. The Carey family was Ray Crenshaw, but you can see that is now a parking lot. It's so where you have the, I think it's a WellSpan building on that side, and I'm trying to think, I want to say Seatown, but it's not, where they are teaching kids how to do businesses.
OJA.
What is it?
JA.
Yes, exactly. That's part of that area. So this is the back part that goes down to Cleveland Avenue. Zion Church is here. And then Penn Park would be up on the other side. Okay, so parking lot there, but all of those properties were owned by the Reeves family. Next slide, please. 100 block of West Princess Street, where York High is located today. That area was known as our Black Wall Street in York. Several Black-owned businesses, including the Howard Hotel. So on the corner of Beaver and West Princess Street, where the school was at, that was the Howard Hotel, which is an entry here from the Green Book. Okay? So in addition to that, there was also it says J-Man Cafe. This was a tap room. But more importantly, the person who owned the tap room let me think about this, I believe it was the 1936 Olympics, where you have Jesse Owens in Germany. There were 18 Black athletes there. One was a man by the name of Mr. John Terry. John Terry was a weightlifter. He was from Pittsburgh. He was living and trained in New York. And after the Olympics, he moved to York, Pennsylvania. Why? Exactly, York barbell. So he held a world record in his weight class for 5 years. And then there was World War II. The person who was running the tap room for him was a man by the name of Paul Country Jake Stevens. Does anybody remember Paul Stevens Road Notary out in East York? It was on the corner of Princess and Hill Street. So it's still a notary today, but when I was growing up, it was Paul Stevens. Mr. Paul Stevens also was a sheriff's deputy. But before that, he was well known in the Negro Baseball League. He and his brother both played in the Negro Baseball League. His brother, Mr. John Stevens from York, Pennsylvania, still holds the record for I believe it was called the Indianapolis ABCs. So he played for those gentlemen from York. But so you had these two stellar athletes that were running this business in the 100 block of West Princess Street. In the 1940s, there was a restaurant there by the name of the Smallwood Restaurant, my great-grandmother's restaurant, as well as other businesses. On the Pershing Avenue side, does anybody know what Pershing Avenue's name was before they changed it to Pershing? Water Street, the creek. So same thing when I say about you have to know like name changes, address changes, terminology, things on that line. So Pershing Avenue was known as Water Street. I don't know exactly when it changed. But on the Water Street side, that's where you had the Smallwood School, which is now where the cafeteria of the high school is located. That is the original foundation of the Smallwood School. There is a historical marker outside that everybody walks past, but it is there. But also on that side, the parking lot across from the gymnasium. You can't see it on this side here. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about this one, but the parking lot where the teachers park on the Pershing Avenue side, that was Moravian Playground. So it started as the Moravian Church, and then there was a cemetery there. Around 1905, the bodies were moved, disinterred from the cemetery. Most were taken to Prospect Hill. They had one and only one Black woman who was actually the last person to be buried there in 1901. And she was taken to Lebanon Cemetery. So it's strange to me that for 4 years, she was able to be buried with other folks that she went to church with, despite the difference in the color. But then when they disinterred the body, they sent her to a colored cemetery. Over here, this area, this is Penn Park. This is where York High is located. This would be St. Pat's, right?
Right.
Two cemeteries. First one, boy, I'm just all over the place today. I should have drank that coffee. The first one says COL Cemetery. Colored Cemetery. The other was Catholic Cemetery, and they were literally separated by a fence. So 1850 to about 1870, colored cemetery. And then we had things like smallpox and other diseases that happened. And the family, I'm saying the family, the city turned that into the Potter's Field. Years later, they go and they disinter the bodies, they move the bodies, and they move them up to North York. It's literally an alley that's between 6th and 7th Street. If you go back there, it's just an open field. As of April of this year, we now have a headstone there. That is for the names that we were able to come up with. But it's a mass grave. There's over 800 bodies in that field. And we now have one marker there. But the interesting thing for me is that when you read the articles, it says, oh no, this cemetery, Potter's Field, this location was for the indigent, the diseased, and the color. Those folks weren't poor. They were Black. The property was taken and utilized when they had disease at the area and they needed to put people in certain places. So as I said, we now have a marker in North York at the Potter's Field. Question?
I have a question. In your research, did you find out where the kids went to school? Look that up?
As far as where the children were able to go to the school. So we mentioned like on the Duke Street side, many of the children for early education, the Smallwood School was a part of the church. So they were being educated through the church. Interestingly enough, the southern part of York County down in Muddy Creek, Delta, Fawn Grove, down there, Black and white children went to school together. So when I talk about segregate, no, they went to school together. They were all farmers and they took care of their communities together. Yes.
In reference to a green book?
Yes.
A green book.
So, well, one, there is a movie. Obviously, it's going to have a Hollywood adaptation on it. But the Green Book was a guide to show people, was a guide for travel. So safe places for colored travelers to stay. We had at least 5 locations in York that we, are working with. One of which was 116 East King Street. Most recently, it was part of the Parliament Arts Group. Was headquartered there until the end of December. But that home, before it was part of the Green Book, belonged to Reverend John H. Hector, who was one of our Civil War soldiers. So that structure is still standing. Next slide, please. Andy, just watch me on time. I can kind of see your watch there. I mentioned about Moravian Playground. So one of the folks that was running the programs at Moravian Playground was a woman by the name of Joanna Harris. If you are familiar with the area around Newberry Street, West Princess, there's a tiny little outlet that says Aunt Joe Lane. Aunt Joe Lane was named for Joanna Harris. Next slide. 50 to 52 North Duke Street, now a parking lot. This is the site of the original Faith Presbyterian Church, which was an all-Black congregation that merged with the First Presbyterian Church in the 1960s. It was one of the first mergers of now having a congregation that was diverse in the United States. You have here known associates. We talk about John Noble. John Noble is one of our USCT. Just this year, we were able to get him a headstone for the first time. He now has a military headstone. And the folks from the National Cemetery Administration came here to York. So part of our initiative, part of what we do and what we were able to kick off here in York, Pennsylvania, there's now a national program known as Grace for Veterans. No, it's not just a Black thing, it's for veterans. When I say that, the reason that I say that, because oftentimes when people hear me speak, yes, I'm talking about African-American families, because in most cases I'm talking about my family. But you also heard I'm a part of the York County History Center. I talk about history. I talk about our families as a whole. So when it comes to something like Arlington or Gettysburg or even Fort Indiantown Gap, collectively, those types of cemeteries, military cemeteries, only account for about 18 to 20% of the total veterans. Most veterans are in a private cemetery. So what we are doing is we are training people all across the country to take care of veterans in private cemeteries. We're also helping people to put in military markers. If your family member does not have a headstone and would like a headstone or any type of marker or the flag insignia, those are at no cost, paid for by Veterans Affairs. And so we go out, certainly we clean the ones that are already there, but so far just in our cemetery, we have now been able to install 17 military markers for veterans. And Mr. Noble was one of those. That's okay, we'll go to the next slide. This here is the 200 block of East King Street. So there were no less than 5 homes in the 200 block of East King Street. Those homes are still standing with the exception of one. But that was the base of operation for the Negro subcommittee of the women's suffrage movement. Interestingly enough, directly across the street was the office of the husband of the woman who headed up the suffrage committees, white, directly across the street from where this woman, you can't tell me they weren't working together. They were directly across the street, 200 block of East King Street. So all I'm going to say is our York County women were badass even in the 1950s. I said it. But the addresses and the names that come up, Ethel Coles Armstrong, her sister Clara, Virginia Harb. Virginia Harb just has what it looks like a cinder block with a metal plate on it. We found that using metal detectors. She and 5 of her other family members, all in the same area, they were over 2 feet underground, and we were able to dig those out, and now they are visible. What we found with Miss Virginia Harb was that she was an artist, and in the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, her artwork was being shown in Philadelphia as part of their big celebration. She was from York. Elder Mary J. Small. I'm curious, has anyone here been to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C.? I highly recommend it if you haven't gone, please. So I go to the museum, I get to the religious section, I'm walking past and I stopped in my track. Why? In Washington, D.C., they have an exhibit to Mary J. Small. I recognize the picture from Small Memorial Church. Her husband was Bishop Small, but her husband wasn't on the wall. She is. She's the first female elder in the Methodist Church in the 1800s. She lived in the 300 block of East King Street, and she's buried at Lebanon Cemetery. We don't celebrate her here. They have a whole exhibit to her in Washington, D.C. They celebrate her at Temple University. They celebrate her at Howard University. But what she did was about taking care of the community. It didn't have anything to do with color. Going to our next slide. This gets you to the 100 blocks of South Duke Street, South Queens, so Royal Square area. Royal Square area is where we had many of our prominent Black families, including Dr. George Bowles, our first Black physician. So for years, I was told that Dr. Bowles, that's the picture here, that he was our first Black graduate at York High. Not true. The first Black graduate was actually a female, about 10 years before him, a woman by the name of Ella Robinson. But then I said, okay, well, he's the first Black male graduate. I don't know why, but I went back and I was reading the newspaper clipping that listed the graduation. And it occurred to me that his name's at the end of the article, even though his last name is B-O-W, his name literally at the back of the line. But then there were 2 more names, but the last names of Burton and Chambers. Turns out there were actually 3 Black graduates that year, all male, but we only talk about 1. So now the mission is kind of like, how do we represent, like who picks whose history should be told? Because all 3 of them went on to do amazing things. Reverend Burton is a graduate of Lincoln University, and then he came back and was pastoring at Faith Presbyterian. Mr. Chambers was the only male, regardless of skin color, but the only male in a sea of women that received an award that year when they graduated. He was, excelling in mathematics. But we only talk about Dr. Bowles. Dr. Bowles was not just York's first Black physician. He headed up the Black Physicians Association for the United States. We regularly had top name individuals in New York. He would commission like full orchestras to play in his backyard on Duke Street, which is now Mural Park. So what we've done, going to the next slide, and working with some of these programs here in Mural Park on East Newton Avenue. There are only 2 structures left on Newton Avenue. One of those structures is this house here, 119 East Newton Avenue, the home where my grandfather grew up 100 years ago. So I finally had an opportunity to. That's okay.
Which,
I can project my voice, you're fine. Don't worry. Show goes on. So I had an opportunity last summer to actually go in the house. So Royal Square area, they were utilizing, you want the.
You should be okay. Hang on. There you go.
Okay. So over at Royal Square, they're utilizing the garage there at the house for the artists, for all of their setup. And I had never had an opportunity to go in. So full disclosure, my family, we never pulled our resources. Nobody ever purchased the home or anything like that. But I had a chance to go in and I went all through and I'm taking pictures. Not a problem. I remember that I have a picture of my grandfather in the car because I was actually on my way to the cemetery. So, things happen for a reason. And I had a picture of him. And it's a picture where he's sitting in a Jeep in a military uniform. Never knew that my grandfather served in the military because it was never talked about. So then when I found that picture, I started looking into his history. And I see my grandfather's papers where he's at Tuskegee. And this is during World War II. So I asked my father, well, Dad, what was Pop at Tuskegee? What did he do? And my father said, what Pop did he do? Well, he was just a mechanic. Okay. And then I keep digging. And then I see his rank is listed as aviation cadet. Pop got sick, spent 9 months in a hospital, and then he got a medical discharge. There are no records. So I tell people all the time, we don't use the word just. In New York, Pop was just a mechanic based on circumstances of the types of jobs that would have been available at that time. So I go out and I get this picture, I take it inside, I place it on the mantle. And now I think, oh, I want to show my family, this, I want them to experience this. So I decide I'm going to go on Facebook Live. Believe what you want to believe. But anytime I went to the stairwell to go down or the stairwell to go up, the feed would cut. It would not allow me to move out of the front row. I was able to take pictures. So I just said, okay, I get it. You're not supposed to do this. So I left. 3 weeks later, I'm going to brunch with a friend. Light changes red, half a block before. So I try and cut down through the alley, almost wreck my car when I see the mural. Not that it's a bad mural, it's not. It was just startling to me that just 3 weeks before it was something else. And so when I do this tour and we go back in this area, I've actually talked to the artist. Somebody reached out to her and told her I hate the mural. I don't hate the mural. What I did say though, knowing the history associated with Royal Square, knowing the history and the greatness of those individuals, my words were, would the vision of the artist have been different if they knew the history of the neighborhood, if they knew in this case that my great-grandmother there raised 5 children on her own after her husband, her 2-year-old daughter, and her mother all died in 1921, same year. And she was left to raise 3 small children by herself. All of her kids went on to do great things. Their children, their grandchildren. My cousin Jerry is now a 3-star general in the Marine Corps. We have educators, we have doctors, we have lawyers. My grandmother, great-grandmother, raised her family alone in this home. Would the vision of the artist have been different if they knew the greatness of being able to survive through that time. One quick thing as far as with this adventure. My father's name was Russell Dorm III. No middle initial. Always made a point of saying no middle initial. His grandfather was Russell Dorm Jr. It didn't occur to me until I started volunteering at the cemetery, like, where's the original? And I couldn't find any records. And so I enlisted an individual, Miss Becky Anstein, who's been doing genealogy for years, and she found it. So it turns out that my great-grandfather's name was Charles Russell Dorm. We hail from Westminster, Maryland. They had twins in that part. And when they had twins, they separated the name, one Charles, one Russell, and called them both Junior. Pretty sure it doesn't work that way, but that's what happened. But she had back-to-back twins. She had two sets of twins. So as we're wrapping up, going to the next slide here. Just to give you an idea of, what's taking place, what's going on. We're working on being able to put in historical markers in the vicinities of these locations. We have some grants that are pending to be able to do that with the storyboards. So that's kind of like phase one. But in the meantime, phase two has already been kicked off, and that we've had an opportunity to receive some funding, next slide, through Explore York with the tourism grant. So we have now implemented some technology. You can go on the Explore York website and look for AR Tours, and then you can download the software for free. Now, this isn't just our site, it's several different sites that are in York, and we'll be listing those out. But right now, you can go to Lebanon Cemetery, or you can go to the area of York High, and you can do a virtual tour. As we're building out the information, for instance, this church here, which we had some other photos, so we'll be working on putting in a 3D model. So if you're familiar with the Bond Building, located at the corner of King and Queen Street, that parking lot directly beside it, that's where this church was. That's the second building that was used for the AME church. So you'll be able to do this virtual tour now and learn about history. Also in that Royal Square area, there's information for the murals. So you can kind of like choose your adventure. Do you want to do history, or do you want to learn about murals? Each time you can come back and do a different instance with that. Next slide. And certainly thank you to the folks with Explore York for helping us with that. I put this on here to remind myself, this isn't just a Lebanon Cemetery thing, but just a reminder that coming up, we're already into November, right? Coming up next month, Reefs Across America will be taking place at cemeteries, not just all across the country, but there are several here in York County. I know they do at Susquehanna Memorial Gardens. They also out in the Wrightsville area, I think they have about 3 or 4 different cemeteries out there. We do it as well. So to sponsor a wreath for a veteran, it's $17 for the wreaths. Now this QR code is going to take you to our page, but you can get to anybody's page from there. But then the other thing is, I don't know how you guys are with service projects, but all of those cemeteries then are going to be looking for people to come out and put those veterans or those wreaths out for a veteran. Again, that's all across the country. So, questions? Oh, you guys are making us wait.
No, Samantha, thank you for your presentation. I know we're a little bit over on time. I'd say if there are questions, anybody can come up and ask. In honor of your presentation, we would like to, we give a book to the Logos Academy. So we will have you sign something, and we will send it to the Logos Academy. Thank you. Let's all thank Samantha for her. Thank you again.
Speaking of books, we through Lebanon Cemetery, we have now published 3 books that all are about people at Lebanon Cemetery, and include one that is just on our USCT in York County.
Very good. Very good. Once again, another round of applause for that. I think that's it for now. Everybody have a great week. I think there's something important going on today, but I'll go out and vote, and we'll see you all next week.